Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. My name is Justin Stein, and I'm the producer of the show. Mark Simon and Matt Manicherian are hard at work, as the brand new SIS NFL Draft website is officially live. Matt did manage to find some time to sit down with several of the people involved with the site, and you'll hear those interviews next. First up, Matt chats with Alex Vigderman and Stephen Polacek of the SIS R&D team about some of the statistical features available on the site. Then, scouts Nathan Cooper and Jeff Dean join the show to talk about the process they went through to put together over 300 scouting reports. Finally, product manager Noah Gadzik discusses the process of putting the site together.
From the football research team at Sports Info Solutions, we've got lead football analyst Alex Vigderman, a.k.a. Big Man on Campus, as you might know him on Twitter. And along with him, we have Stephen Polacek. Stephen, remind me of your Twitter handle.
Polacek FF.
Not as catchy as Big Man on Campus, but we'll let it be. All right, so we got the big brains in here, and I want to get to talking about some of the new stats that we've added to the site this year to going above and beyond what we had in the book in past years. But let's start off by talking about some of the content, because you guys wrote some awesome content that's already up there. We're going to have more coming out in the days and weeks to come as we approach the draft. And that's going to actually be built into this site. For now, you can find it on sportsinfosolutions.com through clicking on research and analysis. Let's start off with you, Alex. Let's start off by talking about the article that you wrote that went up this week. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the article was about sort of the suite of pressure stats that we now have to evaluate pass rushers with. In fact, on the leaderboards page on the our NFL Draft website, there is an entire section just for stats that evaluate pressure.
NFLdraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. I'm going to say it a million times.
Great. We should just have a bumper in there that you just inject every few seconds.
Oh, that's cool. We can get that now. We've got that kind of tech.
Yeah. So in this article, we're talking about evaluating pass rushers. And when we talk about pass rush, oftentimes that goes into things like sacks. But really, when we talk about projecting players into the next level, we want something that is a little bit more consistent from year over year. So we look at pressures instead. More consistent within the NFL level and also more consistent in terms of taking a player who's coming out of college and looking at the next level. But even pressure is subject to a lot of stuff that's not really the player's responsibility. We're talking about things like if you're lined up on the interior, you're going to have a lot fewer opportunities to generate pressure. If you generate pressure, but it took a few seconds into the play, that's not necessarily as reflective of your ability to disrupt the offense. So we wanted to have a suite of stats that give us a little bit more flavor, a little bit more texture for a player's pass rush ability. So we have, for example, quick pressure rate, which is the percentage of the time that you generate pressure within the first 2.5 seconds of play. We have true pressure rate, which is the pressure rate when you sort of remove some of these plays like RPOs and screens and sort of the quick passing game stuff where you weren't likely to get pressure anyway. And then we have sort of our mother stat for this, which is pressure percentage plus minus, which is based on our pressures above expectation metric that we put out in the last year or two. And this is basically taking into account the player's alignment, where they were lined up, the game situation. If it's a passing down, you're more likely to be able to pin your ears back and really go after the passer. And that's the stat that we really want to trust in terms of how well you are able to generate pressure compared to your sort of peers in terms of alignment and that sort of thing. And it's in that situation where you see guys like Aiden Hutchinson at the top of the list, with the exception of Alex Wright, who is a guy out of UAB who sort of blows up these pressure rate stats, but quality of competition really enters into it there.
Just for the listeners, what's the name of that article again? What can they search for?
That article is called How to Find an Edge in Evaluating Edge Rushers.
Oh, I see what you did there. From the big man to the Polacek, I want to talk about what you wrote, because you started writing about trade value, kind of an interesting subject that people have looked into before, but you kind of brought some better tools to the equation. And then right after that, your favorite team made a trade. A lot of people that we work with tend to be Eagles fans, even though we've gone remote recently. I'm around two of them right here. Tell us about what you set out to do and what kind of the results said, not just about historically, but about what's going on in current events.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to highlight, you mentioned me as an Eagles fan, which pretty much we're getting there, as I call myself a Jags fan, but
Oh, yeah, that's right. Struggling. You are a Jags fan. I forgot that. Yeah.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I appreciate we want to be keeping it 100 here.
I'm certainly trending that direction with recent history.
But yeah, got so excited about the trade is why I started thinking that all of a sudden. That's really funny.
Well, yeah, and I mean, seriously, it's just another win for the Eagles. It just happens to be 2 years in a row that they've gotten to pull a Southeastern team and huge increase to their trade value and really do nothing other than delay their picks a little bit. So the original thought for my article was Jimmy Johnson's trade value chart that he created about 40 years ago. And it's still being used in NFL circles today, but I wanted to bring a new light to that. Does it really still hold up 40 years later, or are we just using previous biases?
And people have asked that before, for the record. I think one big limitation of a lot of times when you see people doing this analysis, it's that they've used the approximate value, which is a really nice thing that Sports Reference did to give you like one stat across all sports, but it's really limited in its ability to evaluate things like offensive linemen and some of the stuff that we really care about.
And to spin off of that, so we at SIS created total points, which is a metric to basically provide a value for how many points is a player worth on the scoreboard. So does having a certain wide receiver bring you more or less points on the scoreboard than a different one? So I use that number across the last 5 drafts where we have 2 years of data. So that's going 2016 through 2020. Those 5 drafts, I looked at the players' first 2 years and how many total points they accumulated to get a safe sample of what can you expect to get out of value at each pick. And now I used an expected value. So I'm pretty much, I'll save the fancy math for the article, but basically trying to figure out if I make a pick at, say, 15, what kind of player am I expecting to get from that spot? How good is that player supposed to be? What value will he provide for my team? So to go back to the point about the Eagles, they decided to trade pick 16 and basically get a random value pick from next year. So I do want to mention Ben Solak on the Ringers NFL show. I was listening to it, and he called it asymmetrical value. Basically, you took pick 16 in a relatively weak class, and that being based on like using our year-to-year same models, how we grade players. This year comes in as a relatively weak class. But if the Saints are any better than they were this past year, then your total point difference isn't that much as it go like pick 16. If that becomes 24 next year, that's not a huge difference. If you go 16 up to 8, suddenly that's a huge difference. And regardless of waiting the year, you've increased your value of a pick. You're basically playing the lottery but you're the house. You win. So it's just and there's countless examples of teams just winning trades like this. But I think the biggest takeaway from this analysis is how much more important second, third, and fourth round picks are than I want to say the public understands. So many will look at the first round pick and think that's whether that person succeeds or fails is how good your team is. No, it's the second and third round picks that are really, really strong. I mean, I said it in a previous episode of this podcast about the Bengals when they were making their Super Bowl run. Most of those key players you're thinking of were second and third round picks. Jesse Bates, T. Higgins, more names are escaping me off the top of my head, but that was a team built on second and third round picks. Their value is much higher compared to the first rounders than what Jimmy Johnson, his model was saying. So it makes sense for an NFL team to take that first round pick, and we all say trade down, but if you move back 10 spots and you add a second and a third, that's a massive value gain. And as much as somebody would say, well, why would any team do that? The Vikings and the Jets did it last year. The Vikings decided to wait about 9 picks and they got 2 third rounders in exchange for it. Just a huge, huge increase in total points value based on the expectation at their picks.
And one thing you included in your article that I think it's really cool for people to check out, you can go there and you can look at the trade value chart for this year. So you can see how the expected total points pans out for each pick. And you can use that to evaluate any trades that are going on, like the fleecing of the Saints that the Eagles pulled off just a week ago. I want to talk about some of the favorite new stats from the website. Alex, you're up first. Tell me about some of these passing timing metrics that we added this year and what you can learn from those.
This is something that we added actually last year in terms of our data collection. We added a lot of timing metrics that also was sort of mentioned with the pressure stuff with quick pressure rate. So we're timing drop back times and the time that the throw is in the air, but we're also timing things like when did the first pressure occur. And from a passing perspective, the two metrics that come off of this are snap to throw time, above or below expectation. So that's taking into account the type of drop back, how quickly are you getting the ball out?
So I love this one because we always see on TV average time to throw, Tua Tagovailoa at 1.2 seconds. Yeah, he's throwing RPOs. Of course he's getting it out at 1.2 seconds. That's not really telling us anything. It's much more context to understand, okay, given if it was a 3-step drop or a 7-step drop, how are you processing above or below expectation in those terms? And then we can start to learn something. So I just wanted to make that nuance clear.
Yeah, and there is a little bit more nuance that probably needs to be discussed when talking about this metric. Like one of the guys who's at the back end of this metric is Malik Willis, who these guys who are more mobile quarterbacks are typically going to be holding the ball a little bit longer because they trust their athleticism and all those sorts of things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
And those players perform better when they're under pressure. They don't mind getting under pressure because they perform relatively well. Yeah,
exactly. So there's definitely the guys who are on the back end of the spectrum in this statistic aren't necessarily bad if they have the skill set that complements it. But if we're talking about the guys who are not the super athletes, being able to get rid of the ball quickly is a trait that we look for. So if we're looking at the guys in this year's class, some of the players at sort of the second or third tier at the quarterback position, Bailey Zappi, our 7th ranked quarterback, Desmond Ridder, our 6th ranked quarterback, are both more than a tenth of a second faster on average in terms of how quickly they're getting the ball out. So those are guys, if we're talking about, the more traditional passer type profile, that is something that we're looking for in those kind of quarterbacks. In terms of the other metric that we're getting out of this timing data, we're also calculating what we're calling throw air time plus minus, which is basically taking the distance of a throw. So not just sort of the throw depth downfield, but also taking into account, are you throwing it to the opposite hash and those sorts of things. And also your platform when you were throwing. If you're throwing it on the move, we don't expect you to get as much zip on the ball. So based on those factors, how quickly are you getting the ball to the target and how does that compare to the expectation? And in this case, we're talking about a much smaller time scale. So the differences are pretty tight between players. But Matt Corral, our 3rd ranked quarterback out of Ole Miss, Desmond Ridder at the top, we're talking about like 0.05 seconds faster than typical. So small differences here, but we're also talking about, the throw's only in the air for so much time. So it is sort of a relatively large gap. And all of the top prospects that we're talking about this year are above average by this measure, which I think is something to keep in mind here. It's that you really want the guys with the quality arm strength. And this is comparing to the college ranks in terms of arm strength. So you'd want to see those players be above average.
And as a scout, we're often talking about how having requisite arm strength is important. Having elite arm strength can sometimes be like a kind of like a red herring. Is that the right term? There's a reason. So it's probably more the case that the reason why these guys are prospects is because they're all above average in terms of this regard, rather than them all being above average in this regard is like super telling about anything like in terms of distinguishing prospects. I was personally very surprised that Desmond Ridder did well in that category because doing his report, I have questions about his arm strength. I have questions about his consistent delivery. So that stood out to me. Steven, what you thinking?
You pretty much answered it right there. I was going to say, can we sort of put those Desmond Ridder's lack of arm strength scares to rest? In these metrics are actually telling us he's able to get the ball to the spot fast. Now you can still make the argument of arm strength in terms of taking the top off going downfield. That's not what this is measuring, but in terms of like getting the ball out, putting zip on it, things like that, it sounds like he's actually a lot better than many scouts' concerns.
Yeah, as the scout that wrote the report on him, and that feels like, hey, that was my vision. I'll first of all say, like, I only watched, I think, about 6 games of film, right? That's what we're talking about here. I didn't get to watch all the games like the analytics do. So it could be that there was something else going on there. The other possibility is that there's something about the nature of the throws that he's attempting that might be playing in here that might be worth taking a second look. So I'm always saying anytime the scouting doesn't match the analytics, it doesn't mean just like throw away one or the other. It means go back and try to study and try to understand why that's happening.
Yeah, the piece that definitely that bit that you mentioned about understanding the type of throws that he's making is the thing that the metric is going to do potentially a better job of than a scout looking at it, is understanding how the context affects what your expectation should be. And for what it's worth for Ritter, if you look at other leaderboards, for the quarterback position, he stands out as much as anyone in terms of his deep independent quarterback rating. So on deeper passes, he's like 20, 30 points above the rest of the class on those deeper passes. So there is something to be said for sort of outperforming what you might see on film.
One thing I'll say he does as a deep passer is he gives his receivers a chance. He'll put the ball out there when he gets one-on-one, and he'll give them a chance to win the 50-50 ball. And they did a good job with that. I do think that he has trouble locating it when he tries to put the ball down there. I'd want to see some of that, like we can run this sort of analysis later, maybe put it in the notes, but looking at his throw time over expectation just on the deep outs and things like that in the intermediate game, and then also looking at kind of the on target percentage, I'd be curious on the deep game. I'm sure there's a lot of catchable off target stuff when we start talking about his deep passing.
Yeah, for deep passing also, like even just measuring on target passing for deep passes is a little bit weird because you can throw a pass that appears on target, but a lot of that might be the receiver adjusting well to the play, so it becomes on target as a consequence of some subtle moves by the receiver earlier in his route. So measuring the accuracy on those deep passes can be a little bit funky because, as you're pointing out, if he puts it up so that the receiver can make a play and the receiver does make that play, sometimes that isn't quite captured perfectly.
Right. I mean, ideally there's a back shoulder throw and there's not a back shoulder throw, and there's an accurate throw and there's not an accurate throw. But I get what you're saying. It does get a little bit grayer as you move down the field. So let's switch over to Steven and let's talk about some of the other metrics, maybe a little bit more on the other side of the ball that are interesting here. What do you got, Steven?
So first of all, I want to just mention our first stat of hand on the ball. So this is a percentage of plays where a defender was either breaking up or intercepting a pass or forcing and recovering a fumble, things like that. So there's two names that I want to highlight. First of all, he's probably going in the high end of the first round, but Kyle Hamilton of Notre Dame, he's getting a bunch of conversation about a slow 40 time from his pro day, but really, I'm not sure it matters. He leads all safeties in the hand on the ball percentage, and as well as in pass breakups per game. So while his straight line speed might not be as quick as others, it's showing up on the field that he's got plenty of play speed and better than any of the other safeties in this class. And the other name I want to mention is David Ojaba from Michigan. Now, there comes baked into his draft price is that he tore his Achilles, but he's far and away the best edge rusher in terms of getting his hand on the ball.
I love that we created this stat for basically every defensive position. So you get to see how the different positions are more or less likely to be involved in these sort of like turnover adjacent plays.
And what else do you got, Steven? Any other stats you want to highlight?
Yeah, and the other one I want to highlight is missed tackles. So previously we graded everything as broken and missed tackles together, but recently we've split it off into two separate categories. So a broken tackle is a tackle where basically the defender was on them and by some physical means, they weren't able to tackle them. Now, a missed tackle is one where the ball carrier used some sort of elusive maneuver to avoid a tackle. So there was no actual, I don't want to say no contact, but he wasn't grabbed. So on both the offense and defensive side of the ball, I think there's two really names that stick out. So I should say more than that. So for running backs on the offensive side, in terms of leading the missed tackles category, Breece Hall of Iowa State and Isaiah Spiller of Texas A&M, two of the premier running backs of this class, both had 19 missed tackles per 100 touches. So basically in one of every 5 runs, they were making somebody miss just on some sort of elusive move. And on the opposite side of the ball, Oregon's Kayvon Thibodeau led all the edge rushers with only a 2% broken and missed tackle percentage. So basically when he was able to get there, he was making the tackle. Also, that 2% is significantly higher than those around him. Penn State's Arnold Ebiketie comes in at 4%, and then Boye Mafe of Minnesota and Drake Jackson of USC are at 5%. So his 2% is significantly higher than anybody else's. In once he's there, he's making the tackle.
All right, I'm going to put you guys on the spot before we get out of here. Alex, Eagles, 2 picks. What do you think?
Well, we can check out our SIS sonar to look at the limitations that currently exist on the Eagles roster. Would love to see them make some moves on the back end, really. I mean, I think that they've picked up some guys from other teams the last couple of years, but would love to see some fresh blood out there. And then, they love filling in up front. The offensive line has had varying levels of success, but part of the reason that they've had that success is they've been able to sort of refill the pipeline year over year. And God knows I would not be that excited to see them take another receiver, because I know that Devontae Smith has worked out so far, but the picks the last few years have been a little bit scarier.
I have a feeling Noah Gadzik would have similar sentiment. Steven, we talked about the Jaguars before. Obviously, last year, Trevor Lawrence. This year, back at number 1. Also, wild card. I heard fresh off the Saints, Blake Bortles is available again. So I know that's intriguing. What are you thinking for number 1 overall?
So at number 1, I have my own preference, and I'll save that for a sec. But I think there's 3 options, and I wouldn't deviate from the 3 of Evan Neal, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Aiden Hutchinson. I think I can say as a fan, I'm happy with any of those 3. Really, we need talent. In all aspects, we just need players that are good. As for like projecting picks down the road, you can pick any position that outside of quarterback, Jacksonville needs one. Maybe I'll say running back as well. But Jacksonville needs pretty much anything. So I think to look really at position, I don't necessarily like doing that for Jacksonville. If I was the GM, I'm picking best player available. Now, personally, I would take Kayvon Thibodeau if I was the GM. That's not my decision to make. But I think any of those guys, Neal, Hutchinson, Thibodeau, they're just too good to pass. You need blue chip guys on the team. I'm happy with any of those 3, especially in the trenches where we haven't struggled per se, but we're not winning because of the trenches. So you can increase the value of Josh Allen by making him not the only guy on the defensive line that can rush the passer. And you can protect Lawrence for the long term with Evan Neal. So really any of those 3 are the guys I'm stoked about.
Yep. I think it all starts up front, and weakness up front matches up when you look at the overall efficiency metrics on the Jaguars team page that I know you and Alex worked hard on. They're looking blue in all those categories. You mentioned blue chippers. They just got a lot of blue categories right now. Literally the only category on the page, offense or defense, that you get a little bit of yellow on, where you see them approach above average. They ranked 16th in total points amongst wide receivers last year. That's the top ranking in any category on their team page.
I would argue that pick 33, that pretty much has to be a receiver. Maybe that's just a fan bias, but
get out of here,
have to do
drafter.
something.
Get out of here, you base drafter. All right. Thank you guys for coming on. It's been a ton of fun and awesome work on the site. Excited to share it with the world. NFLdraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nathan Cooper and Jeff Dean, 2 of our lead scouts. You guys did a ton of the scouting reports that went into the site. It's 350, approaching 400 reports on different players to go along with all the different analytics on here. So I want to dive in to the scouting side of things with you. Coop, you oversee the entire scouting department at SIS. What can you tell us about the overall scouting process and kind of what goes into that?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. It's definitely been a long process the last couple months, always one of the more fun times that we have. But yeah, this year actually created a little bit of interesting nuance to the scouting process. Going back to last year with the extra eligibility rule, that kind of threw a wrench into some things. And I'm going to give an estimation here. I'm pretty sure I saw this before last year's draft. Don't have the numbers in front of me. Couldn't find them officially. So I know we're a stats company here with numbers, but I'm going to do some estimation here. But a normal year has about maybe 1,200 to 1,500 players total in a draft class. Last year only had about 600 or 700 with all of the extra years that everybody was taking. This year we're going to have close to 2,000 players. So this year is crazy maxed out in terms of how many players is actually in the draft class because of all the guys sticking around last year. So obviously when you're looking at that makes our list have to be a little bit longer, in terms of having to go through and actually look at these players. We're not looking at all 2,000 guys, but this year at one point, our list was over 850 players that we needed to watch. We had reports and grades on over 750 of them, accounting for some of those guys that are coming back next year. And then when it's all said and done for this year's class specifically, we're going to account for over 650 players. So a lot of players. And like you said, almost 400 players already onto the site. And eventually we're going to hit that 400 mark here pretty soon.
Jeff, I wanted to ask you, because we kind of divided and conquered in a different way than we had in the past before, added some kind of mid-level where Coop and John Todd had split the over-the-top responsibilities for the last couple of years. This year, you and a couple of other guys got in there, kind of owned certain regions of the country. I'm wondering what that process was like for you and how you enjoyed that sort of a vantage point on things.
Appreciate you having me on. It was definitely a different type of focus than before. Most years you come in and you're just scouting the players you're assigned. You get to watch film on them, you send them on, and then you're kind of done, which is, it's kind of a finite point ending. You're automatically done. They send it out, and then you get to see what your report actually becomes at the end. This process was a little different, where I was having a whole bunch of reports come to me, and I was the one actually having to verify what the scouts were watching and making sure that, their numbers made sense and their wording. Part of the great part about having such a large scouting department is you get so many different opinions and looks on a bunch of different guys, but it also works, both sided, where it's a lot of different opinions that, because a bunch of guys, this is their first time maybe watching reports or stuff, they're not exactly sure how to say what they're seeing. I feel like most people we bring in have a good football eye. It's just kind of getting them to communicate that. So my job was kind of making sure that their reports actually said what they wanted them to say, and then trying to slide all these different guys in relation to each other. How I watched certain running backs versus other guys, but very different styles was a unique process too, and trying to compare, power rushers versus speed rushers. And it was a really interesting experience. And then on top of that, being able to be in the process of ranking and finalizing the big board as well with Coop and John Todd and Ben and Jordan was always also a great experience.
Yeah, a couple of really interesting things that you said that kind of like jumped out there. Your experience this year is much more, two things. Number one, from being the regular scout, the kind of first level scout, to being an over-the-top scout, having that perspective of being the person that is ultimately responsible for checking. And, a lot of the scouting, the hardest part of scouting, yes, it's important to be able to understand what you're seeing. But at the end of the day, it's a writing job. Every time you watch a player, you got to write a book report on him. And that's what a scouting report is. And the best people at writing scouting reports are the people that paint the clearest pictures of what these players are. So it ultimately does become a matter of, am I putting into words something so that if Nathan Cooper reads this report, he knows what I saw. That's the beauty of a good scouting report. The other part that you mentioned is from going from just one player off to one player off to one player off. That's what it's like when you're in the cross-check part of the season as a scout. So when you're into like December and you start getting players from other people's regions and you're just scouting, you're stacking all of the defensive ends or you're stacking all the cornerbacks or whatever else it is, you're kind of watching these one-off players. Whereas when you're in a region, when you're in your area scouting and doing those kind of reports, it's a much more holistic picture, which I think you also said kind of based on your role this year, you did a bit more of. So pretty interesting on a few different levels there.
Yeah. And, like I said, it was definitely a different perspective. I really definitely preferred this kind of role, though. It kind of helped me see a bunch of different ways to view players and kind of how other people saw them, which was kind of unique too, right? Because everybody has their own style and what they look for at certain positions. And so kind of realizing how other people write about players and even some of the little expressions they use is kind of nice to kind of piece those all together. And then helping, a lot of our scouts, like I said, this is their first time being on the website, would be a great first experience and exposure for them in the world. And so trying to be able to make sure that you present their best work, I think was the key aspect of the position.
Yeah, I think anybody that checks out the website knows that what we're doing is it's legit. These are real NFL reports, and there's a reason why we got a lot of alumni working in the league and why we got teams that come to us for the sort of information that we can provide. All right, Coop, I want to come back to you, and I want to talk about the depth of this class, because you talked about all those players. And what I think is, well, last year we heard a lot about some really high top-end players. This year we have just 3 blue-chip players. We've talked about those guys on our board. But there's a decent number of guys that are kind of in that first round, I'd say there are more guys that we would say are graded with quote unquote first round grades than there are first round picks this year, which is kind of the beauty of our scale, that we do things by role and not by what round you should be picked in. With all those players, what does that lead to in terms of the depth of this class?
Yeah, obviously ton of guys. And this is one of those years where I think it's good to have a lot of picks. because of how deep it is. I think you're going to get a lot of good players throughout the entirety of the draft. And I think this is going to be one of the most sought after priority undrafted classes that there has been in some time as well, because of all the people who maybe in other years would be drafted in that 6th or 7th round. This year, they're not being drafted. But yeah, when you're looking at sort of the depth of it, the top end, like you said, it's not as deep and as top heavy as some of these last couple of years. But overall, like, I think day 2 is going to be a huge point for this year's class. Ton of good depth of, there's so many guys who could slide into the back end of the first round. And then there's so many guys who are in that 2nd and 3rd round who can kind of fall anywhere in that mix. But when you're looking at like specific positions, if you're looking on the offensive side, we talk about this all the time. Running back and receiver, they're more that dime a dozen type of position. But these are 2 positions that have a lot of good depth this year. Running back, we only have 2 guys at that 6'7" and above level, but a lot of solid, starter level type of guys beyond that as well. And then the receiver class, I don't think the receiver class stacks up to what it has the last 2 years in terms of the top end of the draft, but a lot of really good players throughout. And we have 50 or so guys on the site that you can look at as well. And then going over to the defensive side, a couple positions that really stand out are edge and corner. Edge, we have 7 guys with that 6'7" and above solid starter grade, and there's 14 in our top 100. And then corner, 5 at 6'7" and above, and 13 in our top 100. So 2 really strong positions, especially at the top, but a lot of good production that you're going to get, on day 2 and day 3 at those positions as well.
And you know me, I'm all about the horizontal board. I believe that you need to be looking at things holistically. I believe that the grading scale is built to not be stacked into one single vertical stack, but to be able to evaluate the draft and see where the depth is across positions, and not to be a need-based drafting team, but to understand the different positional value and how that might exist differently depending on where you're at in different situations. This year, we got that SIS 101. We had that top 100 list, the big board. I'm curious from your guys' perspective what that was like for you. Do you guys like that? Because part of me hates it. Part of me is like, I get it. It's not how I like to look at things, but a lot of people just want that sort of bottom line number. What do you guys think of that process?
First off, I'm going to give Jeff credit because he's the creator of the SIS 101 mantra there. So I'm going to give Jeff the credit there. So I'm glad that we have him on here. But yeah, I think the big board is more of a media and fan thing to be honest. And I'm with you there. Like, we're doing it because, every draft site does it. I mean, I think it's good to get some of that, stacking across the positions. I think it's good, especially, that's why we went only to 101 and we didn't do all 350 or 400. I don't think it makes too much sense to go beyond that. So I see both sides of it. It's definitely an interesting process. I think it took us about 5 or 6 hours to go through across 3 different days to go through and create that 101 list. But yeah, I think it's a fun process. And I think the best part of it is between the 6 of us, just getting on the same page about guys. Because between all 6 of us, we watched all of those players. So, just kind of going through and giving each other the details of the different players that maybe I watched, but you didn't, or you did and I didn't, and things like that. It's definitely a fun experience, and it helps to kind of round out everybody at the top end of the draft.
Yeah, those were our draft meetings as we were, bouncing those players all off of each other. Yeah, you guys did just an absolutely tremendous job with all that. Jeff, before we go, I want to talk about some of these scouting, some of these small school guys. We're very focused on the FBS here at SIS, but every now and then you get some of these small school guys or lower competition guys. Even if they are FBS, they might be Group of 5 instead of Power 5. And that's a lot of your sort of cross-check region. So what can you talk about in terms of the challenges of scouting these lower level competition players?
Yeah, when it comes to guys that don't play Power 5 football, week in, week out, the biggest thing is just trying to compare their relative talent to everybody else around them, right? If you're an SEC team, you're playing SEC competition week in, week out, and you're bound to go against some NFL players pretty often. When you're playing in the Conference USA and Sun Belt, you're going to have less opportunity to do so. A couple guys I just want to highlight real quick are Sincere McCormick, running back out of UTSA, had an absolutely killer collegiate career, ran for almost 3,000 yards in the last 2 seasons, just an absolute dynamite player for their team. But when you look at kind of how he actually measures up to NFL guys, it's unfortunately not quite the same story when you try to project him against NFL guys. Right at the combine, he measured in at 5'08", 205, so he's a smaller back, but he ran a 4.6 40, which is definitely not where you want to be, kind of that size. 33.5-inch vertical. He doesn't really pop off the page athletically. And I think when you kind of start breaking down his game film, that is exactly what you see. You see a guy that does a lot of things well, but nothing exceptional, nothing that's going to take him to the next level too much. We currently have him ranked as the 39th ranked running back on our board. I think that kind of maybe would be misleading to people that saw just his blanket stats over the last 2 years. But if you take a look at his advanced stats on his page in the stats overview, I think it shows it right there. He's barely in the top 25 in the vast majority of categories. He's a very, the advanced stats kind of help break down that he doesn't really do anything special. He was a guy that got a lot of carries at a smaller school, and when he was faced with bigger competition, he didn't show up. On kind of the flip side of that, Alex Wright, he's an edge rusher out of UAB. He's a guy that, at the combine measured in at 6'05", 271. So he's a big physical edge rusher, but he didn't really have the same kind of playing experience in college. It took him a little while to actually see the field. And even when he was, there, he sometimes would have to sub off. And I think if a casual fan's looking at him, he had 6 sacks this past season. And I think people might be like, he's an okay player. But when you start to look at the physical traits he has, right, he's big, he's fast, he's got heavy hands. It's the guy that's going to project better. He's one of those guys that, might take longer than 2 years to be successful in the NFL, but he has all the traits teams look for. And again, if we're looking at his stats overview on the right side of his page, right, he kills our metrics in the vast majority of our important stats. Total points per pass rush per play, he's the number 1 player in the country for us, and he just had a killer year in doing the little things right. So even though he's, his grade technically is lower than the running back, that's more, as you were talking about, kind of the role he's going to fill. So as like the 20th ranked edge player, and he's the guy that definitely teams are going to have a lot more interest in just because of his potential down the road.
A number for him that jumps out. He's first in pressures above expectations for edge rushers. That is your pressure percentage, your expected pressures. We've talked about this before, based on your alignment and the usage of when you're actually on the field, what the down and distance is, what the sort of run pass situation is, what your expected number of pressures is. And he's had 11% above the pressure rate that he would get. So an 11% pressure rate on its own is a really good individual pressure rate. Being 11% above expectation is just kind of ridiculous. He's second in quick pressure rate, first in true pressure rate. The only thing is not being an every down player. So these are all rate stats. When it comes down to total points per game, he was 15th, which reflects, not as much time being in a little bit more of a specialized situation. He crushed it there, the 99 overall total points rating on a per play basis. All right, guys. Thank you. You guys absolutely crushed this website, nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. You can see all of the scouting reports on there, all the work that went into it, along with all the advanced metrics. See if they match. We make you the GM. Coop, Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
We've got Noah Gadzik with us. He is the product manager on the NFL Draft site at nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. And as such, he's the best person to kind of come to get a picture of like what this process was like of putting this together. So why don't we start there, Noah? First of all, welcome to Off the Charts.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's been a couple of years, I think, pre-COVID for sure.
All right. So from your perspective, what has the process of seeing this go from the Football Rookie Handbook, the book that it was the last 3 years, to the website? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, it was kind of a crazy process. I don't think it's a secret that we've been talking about how we can improve the book year after year. And then we kind of always talked about, we would love to make this into like a fully fledged website where we can just do so many more things with it. And also, there's some technical side of things where, it's a little bit more advantageous from a company standpoint to generate some revenue, and also just kind of getting our stuff more out there, publicly available to people that don't want to buy a book. It's 2022 and, some people, almost everything is done digitally now. I'll just say it that way. It's pretty nice for SIS to kind of expand their horizons a little bit. And a lot of that is thanks to this new, management group that we got coming in with the investment firm, and kind of open up these resources to really kind of take advantage and see if we can actually pull this off. And I think we really did a great job from the idea to inception of this happened very quickly, and I'll talk more about that as we get into it. It's pretty exciting, and I hope everyone's as thrilled with it as I am.
Yeah, you talked about a lot of stuff there, and the investors and revenue and stuff like that. Good news as far as the listeners go is that this is all free. This is a completely free site. The revenue comes from other partnership stuff that we don't have to worry about. It's free to you. That's one thing that's really cool about it, because you talked about getting it to more people. Number one, it's digital. Number two, it's free. That's a lot easier than a cumbersome book that you have to charge for, because paper and shipping costs money.
Exactly. And this, like you said, really just opens up to now everyone has access to this, whereas before, and books are expensive. Some people I might not want to pay $30 for a big book that I might not read after the NFL draft. So this is pretty awesome.
That's you. You're new school. I'm old school. I'm going to miss having him on the show.
No, that's fair. And I still have them. So maybe we'll kick it old school every once in a while and go back. I would still like to, there's still a bunch of things I would like to do with the website, kind of incorporating our old reports, getting them onto the site. But obviously we gotta walk before we can run. And like the biggest thing here, we just had to get this thing set up and going. And one thing I really want to mention too is like, it's an incredible process to be a part of. Like we really didn't start developing this for real until January of this year. And the fact that we started from nothing on the website to have it fully fledged operational into what it looks like today in 3 months it's pretty outstanding. So I gotta give Joe Baranowski, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. I butcher a lot of names. So if I talk about players in the draft, then I butcher their names, I apologize. I get my mom's own name wrong sometimes, so don't take it personal.
Interesting. That sounds like a bad one. Yeah, Joe's been incredible. Joe, the lead engineer on the site, he's been unbelievable. We should clarify. The scouting department, Nathan Cooper, John Todd, them and their guys, they've been going at this the whole year. The operations department, obviously, as soon as the season started, we were collecting the data, and the research that's gone into this has been years in the making. But yeah, in terms of the actual website, it came together very quickly.
Yeah, good point. To be honest, like with operations, I started in operations here. So, this was a little bit more personal for me being product manager. I used to be in operations and worked a lot with the guys. I mean, my name is in the book in years past. I did a lot of scouting hands-on with it. So I know what goes into this. Operations works on this from this. They're already working on scouting reports for next year now. Like I can tell you that much. So yeah, I didn't mean that in terms of like an operations standpoint. I just meant from like the actual development of this. It's pretty special what we were able to do. Hopefully we don't have to do it as quickly as a turnover moving forward, just because it got a little stressful at the end. But I think overall, everyone should be pretty happy with it. And site looks pretty good, and definitely going to have some improvements as we kept going along all the way up into the draft, post-draft. But now that it's a living, breathing website that can be like really dynamic, really the goal is to get this like make this a year-round, really functional thing that can be relevant for more than just the draft side of things. Now we'll get there, but I think for what it is right now, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome. Things that we can't wait to do in the short term is actually link up our content. We're putting some content out along with it, getting that actually linked up within the same site. That's something we're looking forward to. Certainly John Veras and James Rodriguez and the injury guys here, looking forward to getting the injury notes that we have on some of these guys out onto the site. And then I think in the bigger picture, we'll hold off on that and talk about that a little bit later. For now, let's talk about some of the stuff that's actually there, because we've got the big board. We've got all kinds of the player scouting reports, the advanced analytics. We've got content that I just mentioned. We've got the NFL team pages. And on the NFL team pages, I know I want to talk to you about the Sonar depth charts, because that's one of the coolest things that's been built in there so far. What can you tell us about that? What can you tell us about other features that you think are particularly exciting?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you two of my favorite features that you essentially mentioned is one that we have like an overall big board now, which we never really done in the past. We've always ranked players.
I hate that. No, I'm kidding. I don't prefer to look at things like that, but it's for the people. It's right. For the people. I saw real quickly, some people were like on Twitter, like, oh, big board doesn't consider positional value. Well, first of all, right. The grading scale considers positional value. And second of all, it's not intended to be put in one vertical big board. It's the vertical and the horizontal. But the people want a big board, so we gave them a big board. Yeah, that was more, just to be completely honest, like you said, to make the people happy, kind of get it more, I guess, commercialized, for lack of a better word, but just to make it, kind of like it was something that was requested in books in the past. Hey, you got to give the people what they want. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's exciting. But like you, I personally use the positional rankings when I go through it instead of the actual overall big board. But yes, that is a new feature that we did add. But the one huge benefit about making this a website is now we can do a lot more things, right? And that's where I think the coolest feature of this is that Sonar depth chart, like you were talking about. Essentially what it does is it breaks we keep our database organized of like
what the team depth chart currently look like. We try to keep that as up to date as possible. Obviously, in the off season, there's a lot to keep up with, and but our ops department is amazing at keeping on top of it. And as things happen live, we try to update it as quickly as possible. So that's another real cool advantage of being on a website instead of having the book published in the end of February. And maybe a team's need, maybe a team addressed that need, and now they don't need a safety.
Well, let's talk about it. So let's dive in and let's talk about the Sonar depth chart, because I just pulled up the Eagles team page. I know you're an Eagles fan. I know you're a Nick Foles lifer. You're probably, the second biggest fan of him after his wife. I don't know. You probably are a bigger fan of him than her.
Probably fair.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's get into it with that. So I pull up the Sonar depth chart. I see a team that's pretty good up front on both sides of the ball. Probably no surprise there. That's been a strength of them for a while. Horrible in terms of the back seven on defense, and also just one wide receiver and one tight end, but really weak outside of that in the receiver group, and really weak in the or middle of the pack at best in the backfield.
I don't think it would really surprise any Eagles fan, or honestly any NFL fan that pays attention, that the Eagles have needed secondary and linebacker help for seems like a decade now. So what's kind of cool is with the Sonar depth is you can kind of see, based on team need, based on total points per game. And like you said, in the trenches, they're pretty solid. It's pretty good across the board. Not a surprise there. I mean, going back to my irrational love for Foles, I think you could, really see that the unsung heroes of that Super Bowl was the fact that the offensive line just did a hell of a job protecting. He had all day to do what he wanted out there. And when Nick Foles has time to do what he wants out there, he can make anything on the field. So it all starts up front. That's been Eagles' philosophy forever, ever since at least Howie Roseman has been in charge, the edge, normally drafting defensive line, offensive line pretty early in drafts. And I honestly don't expect that to change based on that philosophy. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see. But yeah, if you look at the Eagles depth chart, obviously the one surprise I will say is I was a little surprised to see that Darius Slay's total points per game rating was on the lower side of things. I'm still under the interpretation that he's a pretty good corner, but obviously it's not perfect there lining up with us. But I don't think he's the biggest issue on the team. Obviously, we're set there. But outside of that, I have question marks. I know Marcus Epps, I think he overperformed expectations, at least to my expectations last year. But I think any team would be lying to you if you said Marcus Epps is our number one safety and feel good about that. So definitely something I would think that they're going to address. You and me have talked about this for a while. I know we do not like drafting based on team needs. And I agree with that. In a perfect world, it lines up that the best player available also fits your team needs. And, that is the ideal scenario. Obviously, normally that doesn't work out. And sometimes that's when teams can go and miss on players, and I'll give a perfect example of how we needed a wide receiver in the past.
Boy.
And
big blue circle on the depth chart.
Yeah.
Negative 0.3 total points per game.
Yeah.
I said negative.
Yeah. Obviously, for for those of you who don't know, that's referring to Jalen Reagor. And I love Justin Jefferson. Now, I'd be lying to you if I knew that Justin Jefferson was going to be a top 5 wide receiver in the league as quickly as he was, or arguably is. But I thought it was pretty obvious that he was the best wide receiver available, and was pretty upset to pick at the time. And that has not changed. But, with that being said, it's kind of interesting. I feel like Howie Roseman has this, sometimes he drafts well, sometimes he does. I think last year we did a really good job in the draft. I know we traded up and got that wide receiver with Devontae Smith. And, people can debate whether or not Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith, who would you rather have? I think they're pretty close. Maybe you give the edge to Waddle there. But I think everyone would agree that if you had to choose between one of those guys separately or one of those guys and an extra first round pick like they got, you would take that. So I think Howie Roseman
worked out well. Yeah,
it worked out well. And Howie does a really good job at trades. I really think you very rarely lose trades. And obviously he's a cap wizard. And, sometimes, we take chances in the draft and we don't do so well. But last year I thought we did a really good job. I was on record. I wanted Asante Samuel Jr. They took Landon Dickerson in the second round. I think that's going to work out. It's not like we missed on that, but obviously we still need corners. And I'm really hoping, in a perfect world that, one of those corners can fall to us with our 2 first round.
You got to listen to yourself. When you're saying, I still think we need corners, and you're talking about how Dickerson did well, but you go back to what you need. And that's what I worry about with the depth chart, because I see all the orange and good players on the up front, and I see all the blues on the back end. But at the same time, I can't help but think there's a reason why they keep being good up front, and it's because they keep restocking before they become need positions.
Yeah. And for the most part, I agree with it, because I think that, free agency is more what you should be focusing on your needs. That's just my opinion. I don't know how you necessarily feel about that, but like, you can't rely on the draft to fill your needs. You should just really try to get the best players, because let's call it like it is. It's football. You're going to need a full 53-man roster,
Right.
full, or whatever the number they might expand it to.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say about the Sonar is it's just based on last year. So that could be a reason why you're seeing Darius Slay coming in sort of the fourth out of 5 tiers. But obviously he's a better player than that overall. So nothing to be misconstrued there.
No, big play Slay is not the issue. Let's get that on.
Other things that I look at here that are kind of interesting. If you look at the efficiency ranks on offense and on defense for the Eagles on their team page, they are in the orange, above average in every offensive category, and they are in the blue, below average in every defensive category, which jumps out right away, which is pretty interesting.
It's funny you say that, because I remember when Jonathan Gannon was getting a lot of love for a head coaching position. I know like team performance isn't necessarily an indication of how good or respected a coach is, but I thought that was a little strange, considering how they were, Sirianni came over, first time head coach, and really the offense, minus the first couple of weeks, once we really started having a heavier focus on the run and utilizing, the skill set of Jalen Hurts, the offense really was, I don't want to say we had kind of a soft schedule. It was a weird year last year. Let's just put it that way. I think a lot of guys on defense transitioning from Jim Schwartz's scheme to Jonathan Gannon, like I remember Fletcher Cox spoke out about, how it took him a while to really get acclimated to it. And he kind of wanted to be more aggressive. I personally would like to see them be more aggressive, but you also have to have the personnel to do that. And, let's just call it like it was. They really didn't. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's something that I hope that we see a big improvement. I mean, if we don't see a big improvement in it this year, the Eagles will not be a playoff team. I'm just going to call it like it is.
All right, so let's move forward and let's talk about dynasty a little bit, because I'm not a big fantasy guy. I know you're a big dynasty guy, and the draft site, obviously, once you find out where a team goes, it's a lot easier to do your dynasty stuff. But as things shape up right now, I wanted to hear what your takeaways are, what you can kind of learn from this sort of information, and how that aligns with who you're targeting.
I love dynasty sports in general. I'm in a bunch of leagues, but what's kind of unique about dynasty is that, you have these guys for a longer period of time. It's definitely, in my opinion, better to do your full rankings once you see where they go, because, guys can get blocked, obviously opportunity, and et cetera. But, with this sort of league, you really just want to evaluate the player for the talent. And, that's why and there's a bunch of guys in this draft that I'm like super excited about it. I think one guy I'm really excited about, and it kind of goes with our rankings too, is Treylon Burks. It seems like almost everyone is kind of consensus top 5 is different everywhere you look of these wide receivers available. And it's a fun receiver class, but Treylon Burks' skill set really is interesting to me. It really sets himself apart from some of these other guys, in my opinion, that he's kind of just a big physical guy, but he's also pretty athletic, good speed threat. And he just seems to be like, you could put him in almost any type of situation, and a creative offensive coordinator can put him in the best position to succeed. And those are the type of guys that I'm a big fan of. I've seen a lot of comps, like kind of like a Deebo Samuel type player. I don't know if he's as dynamic as Deebo. Deebo's pretty special. I don't know if many people are.
But he's got that kind of skill set where he'd like get the ball in his hands and let him go.
Definitely. So he's a guy from the wide receiver position. I'm really high, and he's my number 1 wide receiver that I'm targeting in this drafts. Hopefully no one in my leagues are listening. I got, well, actually, I hope they're listening, but I hope they don't pay attention to what I'm saying. I got Jameson Williams pretty high too. I know we have him as our second rated player. Both those guys, by the way, at the same grade level, that 6.9 grade level, which we're basically saying this dude's a number 1 wide receiver. Maybe not all pro, right away, but you're talking about a number 1 wide receiver. Yeah, and I think that more people would consensus agree with us if he didn't have the injury.
By the way, the injury flag is a totally different thing. John Veros, like we mentioned, you can't wait until we get that on there. But that's separate from the grade. The grade is what the player is, kind of based on them being at their max health going forward, which can be limited. But we got to expect, he's being graded based on his skill is the point I'm trying to make.
But yes, Jameson, I'm really interested to see where he ends up going in this draft. I think he's the best pure speed threat in this draft, but he's also more than just a speed guy. He's got really good route runner, really good game. He's a game breaker. And those are the type of guys that, you can put the ball in his hands. He can score at any point in the field. And those are the type of guys that really can help separate themselves. moving on from Jameson Williams, obviously I think everyone knows Garrett Wilson, all the other guys that we're all pretty big on. I like Drake London, a big body guy. I have a little biases that I'm a little worried about USC wide receivers. I just, had some bad post-traumatic experiences there with Nelson Aguilar, but I want to go on record and say Aguilar came through when we needed him. So I'm not too worried there, but I do like Drake London. I think he's a big physical guy, and teams that need a big guy that can go up and get those 50-50 balls, there probably isn't anyone better in this draft than him, in my opinion, that can go and do that. So he's another guy I'm interested in. And another guy that seems that we're high on, and I agreed with, that kind of surprised me that no one else does, is Justin Ross. Justin Ross is very interesting to me. Another big guy, as you can see, I'm looking at some of the bigger, more physical wide receivers. Nothing wrong with the little guys, just what I'm looking at here that stand out to me in this draft. I think Justin Ross he's got that kind of quick twitch ability for a guy that size is pretty rare. And so I'm pretty excited to see you put that combination of size, athleticism, quick twitch ability. You can really see him come in and contribute, I think, quicker than people expect. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up. I'm really interested. I'm going to keep an eye on that. Those are the big wide receivers that I'm keeping my eye on, that I have pretty high up on my board. Obviously, moving on, got to move on to running back, which is obviously, in fantasy-wise, big position of need. Often you see these rookie running backs come in as guys that go pretty quickly on these dynasty draft boards. My favorite in this draft is Breece Hall. I know we have Isaiah Spiller, but I love Breece Hall. He's a big physical guy. He really seems to have that skill set where you can see him just really taking over a backfield from day one. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but he's kind of got that like Najee Harris skill set ability where you can come in and be like, all right, day one, you're the guy. So that's,
again, I'll mention those guys have the same grade on them. They're both at the 6.7 grade range, which is a starting level running back grade. I'm with you though. There's the explosiveness with Breece Hall is something that really stands out. I was on the radio, Trent Condon and the guys over in Iowa. They're awesome. They have me on a bunch. And we were talking about missed tackles per 100 touches. He was number one in the country, Breece Hall, right? 19 missed tackles per 100 touches. We're not just talking about broken tackles, right? Broken tackles is a totally separate thing. When you run through somebody, we're just talking about juking people, eluding people. That's the Breece Hall skill set. And that's one of the things that projects to the NFL level.
That's another reason why I'm so excited about him. Like, you just pretty much took the words out of my mouth. Exactly. And he's also a pretty underrated pass blocker too. And in my opinion, and we talked about this, is why, I like the kind of the Jordan Howards of the world. Running backs need the block. It's arguably one of their most important traits that they need to have. And there are definitely some guys that are liabilities in that area, and there are guys that are more advanced in that area, and everything in between. And I think Breece Hall fits that criteria of being a little bit more advanced, and I don't think he'll struggle with that gap as much as some other running backs.
Well, I think you got fights coming with both Nathan Cooper and Alex Vigderman, because Nathan Cooper said he's got him as a 4 for pass protection ability and total points, pass blocking total points this past season, a big fat 0 for Breece Hall. Not uncommon. It's very hard to earn points like that. But
that is interesting. I was surprised. It's rare that the way I feel is like, one of the big points of this website is to see like what scouting that you see on scouting and what you see on the analytics, and hopefully you like to see them match up. Maybe it was just a couple of games that, we watched differently, and like, I'd be lying to you. Nate Cooper goes in way more in depth than I do on these guys. So maybe I just happened to see a game where Breece Hall did a little bit better than the in-depth that Nate did. But I really am not as concerned about his pass blocking as I think some others may be. But we'll find out, right? And then the last running back I wanted to mention, who's another kind of bigger guy that I think is really interesting, that we have ranked at a 6'5" and our number 4 ranked running back, is Damon Pierce, running back from Florida. Another guy, again, he's kind of similar to Breece Hall, not as explosive, but in terms of like the skill set that we were kind of talking about, similar size, similar weight, more physical type runner, but really sticks out is the contact balance. And there's no denying that Damon Pierce is a strong dude. The only question mark, I guess, with him is maybe the receiving ability. Just didn't get asked to do much of that. So maybe he's not a true 3-down running back as compared to other guys, and that's why he's graded a little bit lower. But another guy that I'm pretty excited about and really interested to see where he ends up. I actually think he would be an excellent fit for the Eagles, personally.
all right. Well, on that note, I will let you out of here. Thank you, Noah. Obviously, all the work you've done on the site is awesome, and it shows. People can check it out. NFLDraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, no problem. And I just want to tell everyone this is only the beginning. So keep on the lookout for some new stuff coming to SIS. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I can't wait to get that horizontal big board built onto the site so I can stop answering these top 100 questions. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. I promise.
Make sure to check out the other SIS podcasts, Playing in Space, our NBA focus show, and the Sports Info Solutions Baseball Podcast. Find them wherever you get your podcasts. For Matt Manicherian, Mark Simon, and all of our guests, thanks for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.